Hello and welcome to Inside Crimes. Today we want to look at the solved cold case of Lina Reyes Geddes. Before we dive into the case, please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more crime cases. Lina Reyes Geddes was born on the 26th of August, 1960 in a small town in Mexico. She had ambitions to pursue greater things in life. Lina was an accomplished ballerina and, with a degree in international business, she had hopes of breaking into the business world to become one of the greatest business tycoons across national boundaries. Her love for international business influenced her choice for a life partner. Growing up, she wanted to share her life with someone who would love her just as much as she does him, and also, she wanted someone who sailed the same career ship as her. In 1996, 35-year-old Lina Reyes Geddes left her native town in Mexico to the United States in search of greener pastures and hopefully to get to meet people who shared the same business mindset as hers. While learning and developing her skills, she waited for her right type of man. That same year, in 1996, she met Edward Geddes in New Mexico. Edward Geddes was 25 years her senior and was everything Lina Reyes wanted in a man. Aside from his appealing physical qualities, he was a business owner and knew the in and out of the business world. Lina Reyes at that point fell in love with Edward and felt she could eventually have the future she had always wanted. They started dating, and 6 months into their relationship, they got married and moved into an apartment in Youngstown, Ohio. Although, it is unclear what she did after this and whether she was able to keep up with her career. 2 years later, on the 8th of April, 1998, Lina Reyes Geddes had planned to travel back to Mexico to visit her family, with the journey taking her via Texas by plane. Lina prepared for her journey as she supposedly packed a blue sleeping bag as a gift for her young cousin before leaving. However, the day ended and Lina Reyes Geddes never arrived to Mexico, and no trace of her could be found. Her relatives in Mexico were frantic with worry when her flight never arrived at Mexico. As days, weeks, and months passed by, the Reyes family still could not get a hold of Lina Reyes Geddes. When they contacted Edward Geddes to know what had happened to his wife, he said he had not seen her since she left on the 8th of April, 1998 to visit them in Mexico. Her family became worried and had a feeling that something was wrong because it was unlike Lina to vanish with no trace. They then called the police in Ohio to report their daughter and sister missing. Edward Geddes, on the other hand, initially failed to file a missing person report until 6 months later in October of 1998 did he inform the police that his wife was missing. The first suspect in the case was Edward Geddes. He was brought in for questioning by the Youngstown police in October 1998. When he was asked about his missing wife, Edward Geddes told the state investigators that he last saw her when he dropped her off at the airport in Pittsburgh. He said Lina Reyes Geddes carried a suitcase, a cosmetic case, and a blue sleeping bag that he said was supposed to be a gift for her young cousin. He mentioned to the investigators that he kissed his wife goodbye outside the airport, and that was the last time he saw her. With no evidence pinning him to Lina Reyes Geddes' disappearance, the police struck out Edward Geddes as a suspect. Authorities in Ohio did all they could to find Lina Reyes, but no leads were ever found, and the case slowly dwindled and went cold. Meanwhile, on April 20th, 1998, in Garfield County, Utah, a civilian passing through State Route 276 milepost stumbled upon something suspicious at the Maiden Water Spring, near Lake Powell and Tickaboo. They stopped and walked over to the odd-looking item and soon realized it was a large bundle, roughly the length and dimensions of a human body, which had been discarded just off the side of the road. At that point, the passerby contacted the local Garfield County Sheriff's Department, and within minutes, officers were quickly dispatched to the scene. The officers approached the bundle and noticed whatever was inside was wrapped in a children's rug, which had a design of houses and roadways on which children could play. They then began to unroll the large rug and soon discovered a sleeping bag inside. Inside the sleeping bag was a patchwork of various plastic trash bags secured with duct tape and bound with rope. Everyone at the scene had a bad feeling about what they were about to discover as the investigators gradually cut away and peeled off the layers of tape and plastic. When the last layer came off, investigators got a shocking discovery. Lying in the discarded bundle was the body of a woman who had wounds which indicated that she had died as a result of a gunshot to the head. The woman was described as having multiple dental restorations, freckles on her face, tattooed eyebrows, and several moles, which included a unique mole on her right ear. Though her face was still identifiable, her fingers had been chopped off in what is thought to have been an attempt to hide her identity by the perpetrator. The autopsy done on her revealed that the cause of her death was as a result of the gunshot wounds she had suffered. In a bid to identify her, her statistics were imputed into online databases, which described her as Hispanic or Native American with dark eyes, dark shoulder-length hair, and a freckled complexion, but no missing persons reports in the state matched her description. Despite all efforts made to identify her, nobody came forward, and she became another Jane Doe who was dubbed the Maiden Water victim after the natural spring by which she had been found. With no leads, the case went cold. In the year 2018, the Utah State Bureau of Investigation decided to appeal to the public for leads when they carried out a cold case review of the Maiden Water victim. They took the unusual step of publishing post-mortem photos of the Maiden Water victim, including a photo of the unique mole inside the arch of her right ear. That same week, police in Youngstown, Ohio, who were updating their missing persons cases, obtained a photo of Lina Reyes Geddes from the United States Department of Homeland Security. They then released the photo to the public. Days later, a woman in California who was a true crime fan and an amateur sleuth got in touch with authorities in Utah to say that she had seen a missing person cold case in Ohio in which the victims seemed to look similar. The true crime fan had noted the mole on the upper arch of the Maiden Water victim's ear. In the Ohio's published photo of Lina Reyes Geddes, a mole was visible in the same spot. After the Ohio and Utah authorities were made aware of this, they followed the tip and discovered that Lina Reyes Geddes and the Maiden Water victim weren't just similar but were one and the same. Authorities from Utah and Ohio then put out new information in Texas, hoping to find Lina Reyes Geddes' family members. Luckily, Lina Reyes Geddes' sister, Lucero Reyes, who was just 11 years old when Lina disappeared, called the authorities to inform them that Lina Reyes Geddes was her sister. In order to ascertain that fact, provision was made for Lucero Reyes, who traveled over 300 miles to Monterrey, to the United States consulate nearest to the family's home in San Luis Potosí, so that authorities could obtain a sample of her DNA. After the DNA testing was done, the Maiden Water Jane Doe was confirmed to be her missing sister. Now that the detectives knew who and where Lina Reyes Geddes was, they started an investigation to find out who killed her. Initially, the officials with the Utah Department of Public Safety wondered if she had been murdered by Scott Kimball, a convicted serial killer at the time who is still serving a 70-year sentence imposed by the state of Colorado after killing 4 people, including his uncle, between 2003 and 2004. 3 of his victims were found in remote areas of Colorado and Utah, and there seemed to be a number of similarities between how his victims were killed and found and how Lina Reyes was. For instance, the cause of Lina's death matched that of Scott Kimball's victims, and Scott Kimball had also discarded bodies by wrapping them up. One time, Scott Kimball had tied one of his victims' hands with a complex knot system that matched Lina's crime scene. He had also previously used a child's play mat to dispose off a body. Scott Kimball's former wife and son had made statements alleging they saw him purchase a rug similar to the one used to wrap Lina Reyes Geddes' body. The detectives were piecing obvious facts together and were at the verge of unraveling the mystery behind Lina Reyes' death. A warrant for his DNA was then filed in Logan County, where Scott Kimball told Colorado investigators that he had killed 21 people, explaining that one of them was a hitchhiker on a bridge near Haight, Utah, in 1998 or 1999. Haight, Utah was about 10 miles from the recovery site of Lina Reyes Geddes. Scott Kimball said he had been at a family reunion in Bryce Canyon, Utah, around the time of the murder. Detectives were hopeful that Scott Kimball could actually be Lina Reyes Geddes' killer. However, their hopes were quickly dashed when they interviewed Scott for over 2 hours and realized he did not know anything about the crime scene where Lina Reyes Geddes was found. The detectives, who were disappointed, were forced to rule him out as a suspect when his DNA didn't match with the one at the crime scene. The investigators then concluded that the glaring similarities between his victims and Lina Reyes Geddes were merely coincidences. After Lina Reyes Geddes was identified, people who knew her and her husband in Ohio came forward with some tips that suggested Edward Geddes as the murderer. In 2019, investigators decided to try the new techniques in DNA analysis, which were making headlines at the time, following the eventual solving of the Golden State Killer case. The West Jordan Police Department then used an MVAC, a device similar to a shop vac, to extract genetic evidence on the rope that had been used to bind Lina Reyes Geddes. During the genetic evidence extraction, 2 different genetic samples belonging to 2 different individuals were found on the rope. This caused confusion for a while until it was later realized that one of the DNA sample belonged to a not expert who detectives consulted on the case. He had accidentally added his own DNA to the sample on the rope and contaminated it. Regardless, investigators were able to isolate another piece of genetic material that appeared to have belonged to Edward Geddes. Unfortunately, Edward Geddes had died by suicide in Nevada in 2001, 3 years after Lina Reyes Geddes was murdered. It became impossible to directly compare his DNA to the one found at the crime scene because, after his death, he was cremated. However, in order to ascertain that the DNA sample found on the rope really belonged to Edward Geddes, a company called Pure Gold Forensics used familial DNA from 3 of his living relatives, one of them being his son. The DNA testing came out a match to the DNA found on the rope used to tie Lina Reyes Geddes. In 2022, the Utah State Bureau investigation then considered the Lina Reyes Geddes case solved and Edward Geddes to be the murderer. Unfortunately, he died by suicide, taking the question of why he killed his wife to his grave. It is no doubt that Edward Geddes went to a great extent to cover up his involvement in the crime and to ensure Lina Reyes Geddes' identity remained a mystery, seeing that he had cut off her fingers and traveled over 1,800 miles to dump her body in Utah where she had no ties. Some people speculate that Edward Geddes might have been a controlling man who often abused Lina Reyes Geddes and made her uncomfortable. This photograph of the 2 shows Lina looking uncomfortable while Edward Geddes could be seen grasping her firmly by the shoulders. The video of Edward Geddes' interview with the police in October of 1998 portrays a man whose only interest is to cover up his own involvement in his wife's disappearance. Like a pro, he discussed the sleeping bag she was taking on her trip as a gift for her cousin, the one in which he had already concealed her dead body. He often laughed as he tells the investigator how he secured the bag and wrapped it up tight for the journey. Furthermore, to portray himself as a loving, attentive, and caring husband, he had told the detectives that Lina Reyes Geddes was wearing one of his favorite underwear that morning when she left. Some reports say perhaps Lina Reyes Geddes was actually planning to leave Edward Geddes that day, on the 8th of April, 1998, concluding that the trip to Mexico was more than a simple visit to families. We all will probably never know, but thanks to DNA and an observant true crime fan, investigators and Lina Reyes Geddes' family finally have answers as to what happened to her 24 years ago. Following the resolve of the case, Agent Brian Davis from the Utah Department of Public Safety said, "To have this answered finally after 24 years is incredible. I know it's not the answer that Lina's sister would have wanted when she found her sister, but they had suspected. In fact, quite frankly, their family thought that Edward had done something to her. They just hadn't proved it." Lina Reyes Geddes' sister, Lucero Reyes, said, "I felt like for 20 years no one would listen to me, but now I know what happened. I'm here to bring her home, not like I expected, but I'm bringing her back home with me."